Hello, and welcome to the fourth episode of Out of Time Reviews. I'm Andrew Parker, film critic and senior writer for thegate.ca, once again back to take a look at some of this week's newest releases in cinemas and on streaming. I've really been loving putting the show together over the past few weeks, and I look forward to doing more of these. It's been a lot more fun and rewarding than I expected. I haven't abandoned doing written work, and you can still find a lot of that stuff over at the Gate. Pretty soon I'll be starting up my yearly look at the Oscar categories over there, and there's going to be a few more reviews going up exclusively over there in the coming days, so keep an eye out for all of that. I know I have a lot of room to grow on this side of things. Hopefully, in the future, we'll have more graphics and a better, more proper set than my messy ass bedroom for this down the road. But if you've come this far and you've been sticking with me, thanks for that. And know that I have every intention of making this into something a lot more special in the future. Also new on the channel this week, we have a trio of great interviews. One with Sony Imageworks animator Eric De Carolis, where we talk about his work on the animated sports comedy GOAT, which is in theaters now and last weekend just climbed to the #1 spot at the box office. I've got a chat with writer-director Adam McDonald about adapting the young adult zombie thriller This Is Not a Test for the big screen. That movie is now playing in both the US and Canada. And finally, it was a big privilege of mine to talk with Oscar-winning actor Troy Kotsur about his role as a broken-down Canadian cowboy in the crime thriller In Cold Light, which hits Canadian cinemas this weekend, is now available in VOD in the States, and we'll get to in a little bit. Links to all of that stuff will be in the description below. But for this week, we have a lot to get into with 8 movies to cover, including looks at The Bluff, a big-budget R-rated action thriller with pirates, the critically acclaimed Iraqi period piece The President's Cake, looks at the previously mentioned Canadian-made genre movies This Is Not a Test and In Cold Light, Olivia Colman and John Lithgow in the family drama Jimpa, the high-grossing Oscar-nominated Japanese epic Kokuho, Man on the Run, a look at Paul McCartney's formation of the band Wings following the dissolution of the Beatles, and yeah, if you want to skip to the very end of this video, we'll be looking at Scream 7. Thanks again for being here. Like, share, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Let's get on with the show.
Smoke in the wind. You're the last man I expected to call the cavalry.
Let him come. They'll find an island harboring a wanted criminal. And a valiant crew that died, bringing her to justice.
In The Bluff, Priyanka Chopra Jonas stars as Ursula Bodden, a once feared and bloodthirsty 19th century pirate who tried to leave her old life behind and settle down somewhere nice in the Caymans. While her husband's been away at sea, Ursula's been caring for a disabled son, played by Vedat Naidu, and boy-crazy sister-in-law, played by Safia Oakley Green. There's been peace on the island for quite some time now, but the ruthless Captain Francisco Connor, played by Carl Urban, is coming to settle debts both personal and professional. He thinks she's sitting on a large stash of his stolen gold, and she's more than prepared and capable enough to fight Connor and his advancing hordes back to the briny depths. It's very hard these days to make a film about pirates cool. Pirates haven't been cool for a long time, and they now have a sort of cartoonish image these days. Director and co-writer Frank E. Flowers, a veteran of music videos, does his best with The Bluff. The violence, while sometimes sanitized in odd ways, is appropriately bloody and brutal, including some really gnarly bits involving cannons, killer crocs, flintlocks, and scabbards that run people through wholesale. The style of action is a bit chaotic at times, with sometimes awkward motion and more match cuts than a human could possibly sit down to count, but whenever The Bluff sticks to its guns and swords, a decent enough time can be had. It might actually be preferable to watch The Bluff through the lens of a siege movie, rather than thinking about this as a pirate movie. It's largely set on a single island and made up of set pieces where the heroes and villains do battle for a while before falling back to a different location. It has the well-worn and familiar plotline of a former baddie trying to protect their family from a dark past, and it doesn't deviate too much from that. A lot of Ursula's preparations for battle and styles of fighting are very much in the John Wick revenge vein, albeit retrofitted to fit the technology and fighting styles of the time. On the acting side of things, Chopra Jonas proves to be much better at the physicality of her role than the dramatic side. She's admittedly an odd fit for the part of a Caribbean pirate, a role originally intended for Zoe Saldana, who had to drop out of starring in this, but remains on board as a producer alongside blockbuster filmmakers the Russo brothers. Chopra Jonas's dodgy, constantly changing accent is also a choice that might have been better off abandoned. Urban, on the other hand, understands the assignment here perfectly, downplaying the campiness one normally associates with Buccaneer villainry and dials things down to a pleasantly chilling degree. The subplots involving Ursul's family appear to have been cut down drastically along the way, with everything involving the sister-in-law's boy craziness seemingly jettisoned as soon as it starts. But that might be for the best as the film rises and falls based on Chopra Jonas's convincing ability to kick a whole lot of ass and Urban's providing of the hero with a perfectly capable villain. While I'm sure The Bluff would look amazing on a huge screen, this is the kind of blockbuster that plays better at home. It's a mildly enjoyable movie for what it is, even if the scope suggests it could be a whole lot better. My rating for The Bluff is a passable 6 out of 10.
والطالب اللي راح يجيب لنا الفاكهة الطازجة سعيد محمد قاسم.
نعم أستاذ، بس ما انتهت السبت.
ليش على ما تقدر تجي؟
أنا حاط ويا أبو الولاية.
شو تسوون تلعبون طاوة بالولاية؟ ايش بلا كلام؟
آسف أستاذ.
تتذكر رسول واهله العام من ما اجوا الاحتفال اللي سويت بيهم؟
كتبت بيهم تقرير.
كتبت بيهم تقرير، هذا واجبي. وشنو عقابهم كان؟
سحلوهم.
سحلوهم سحل مثل الكلاب. اريد اقول لكم شغله، انا عبد مامور، اي واحد يخالف الامر من المعلم مالته اكتب بيه تقرير. اذا طلع لك جني او مدري من قرايبك توفى، لو انكسرت رجلك لا تلومون من اللي يسوون بيكم نفس الدقه اللي سووها برسول واهله. فهمتوا؟
نعم أستاذ.
تردون اكتب بيكم تقرير؟
Writer-director Hassan Hadi's first feature, The President's Cake, transports viewers back to Iraq in the 1990s, at the height of Saddam Hussein's power and during a time of heavy UN sanctions against the country that led to poverty and food insecurity on an enormous scale. Overseen by a ruler that demanded fealty from his citizens, Iraq was the kind of place where the morning Pledge of Allegiance before the start of classes was a blood oath to their leader, and a country where Hussein's birthday was a national holiday. That's where 9-year-old Lamia comes in, played perfectly by newcomer Benin Ahmed Nayef. In a random draw, Lamia has been tasked with providing a birthday cake for the yearly late April celebration, and if she doesn't, her family will be punished, most likely by torture at the hands of the military. The only family Lamia has left is her aging, ailing, and recently laid-off grandmother, played by Wahid Tabet Kribat. With sanctions and scarcity all around, getting even the most basic of ingredients for a cake would necessitate not only a trip to the big city, but the selling of household items and family heirlooms. Lamia loves her grandmother dearly and is determined to make this cake a reality. But when Grandma surprises Lamia with an unforeseen wrinkle in the plan, the young girl doubles down on her intention to get the ingredients by any means necessary, aided in part by a classmate, played by Sajjad Mohammed Qassam, who's equally struggling and has been tasked with providing fresh fruits for the same celebration. Although Hadi imbues the President's Cake with a sunny disposition and highlights some of the natural and urban beauty that often goes unseen in films set in Iraq, the word that best describes the President's Cake is devastating, both in terms of structure and historical context. Clearly inspired by European neorealism, The President's Cake is one of those movies where something brutal or depressing will keep befalling the characters both young and old in each progressing scene. It's like trying to stop up holes in a dam. As soon as one gets plugged, another bigger hole opens up somewhere else. Iraq under Saddam is depicted as a cruel, hopeless place where everybody is just barely hanging on. Whenever young Lamia tries to cut a deal with someone for ingredients or information, she's often met with some variation of someone saying, "That's not my problem," and is either brusquely dismissed or exploited in some unusual way. There are many creepy and disturbing moments throughout The President's Cake that will leave viewers on edge, particularly ones that speak to the role of women in such a fiercely patriarchal society. Hadi, who picked up an award for having the best debut feature at the Cannes Film Festival last year, excels at showing how both the film's drama and dark humor are born from the same place of frustration. There aren't many good choices for Lamia to be found, especially when she's constantly reminded that this burden is somehow supposed to be a blessing and an honor to her country. She could lose everything to achieve her goal, including her beloved pet rooster and constant sidekick, Hindi. Or she court become a thief and court equally serious punishments if she gets caught. Or she can just give up and let her grandmother suffer the wrath of the state. There's no winning here, something hammered home by the film's appropriately but oppressively bleak final act. Hadi's vision for the film is assured, but even with the weight of history on the filmmaker's side, it can often feel like they're laying things on a bit thick here. That's not to speak down to the historic atrocities committed in Iraq during this time, but to the sense that The President's Cake is trying to cram a lot of highly charged emotional beats into a story that only spans a couple of days. It feels like a lot. It adds a layer of dramatic manipulation that's hard to fully shake, but the film offers a nice reflection of its protagonist. It gets the job done by any means necessary. The President's Cake is also going to get a 6 out of 10.
Drinking game?
Never have I ever cheated on a test.
Oh, I call bullshit.
When you're smart, you don't have to.
Never have I ever had sex in the school bathroom.
Wait, what?
Never have I ever survived a zombie invasion.
What are we supposed to do?
This is not a test. Lock all doors and cover all windows.
No one's coming to save us.
Writer-director Adam McDonald's latest horror thriller is an adaptation of author Courtney Summers' young adult bestseller This Is Not a Test, the story of Sloane, played by Olivia Holt, a teenager struggling with depression as the world is on the brink of collapse. On the grim day that Sloane is thinking of taking her own life, a zombie-like infection starts taking over the world. With her plans suddenly put on hold for a variety of reasons, she joins up with a pack of fellow teen survivors that decide to hole up in their local high school while awaiting further instructions. This Is Not a Test is a meat and potatoes kind of horror movie with just enough of a powerful hook to keep things interesting. There's lots of genre staples, tropes, and cliches to be found here, from fast-moving zombies to clashing ideologies over what to do, doomed romances, scenes where the characters have to suss out if someone's been secretly bitten or not, and an opening salvo that plays like a bleaker riff on the opening to Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead remake. None of this is a bad thing overall, as McDonald's able to keep everything together in an entertaining and emotional enough package. It moves with intensity and purpose, even if viewers get the sense that they've seen all of this before. The film's also set in 1998, although one would be forgiven for not noticing, as not a ton's done with this detail. The biggest advantages This Is Not a Test has are its subtext and the leading performance given by Holt. The idea of building a story set in a decaying and hopeless world from the perspective of someone who wanted to give up long before everything went sideways is something I think a lot of viewers in the modern era can sadly relate to. Questioning how you can go on in a world where all hope seems lost and things only get worse has an eerie timeliness to it at the moment, and Holt leans into those feelings of discomfort really well. The rest of the young cast also does well by their more archetypical characters, and Luke McFarlane deserves special commendation for his portrayal of a cagey teacher who somehow finds his way past the teens' reinforcements. The cinematography is rather dynamic, and the score from Bring Me the Horizon guitarist Lee Malia brings in some extra energy to the proceedings. It's the little touches in This Is Not a Test that net this one a 6 out of 10.
I know how hard it must have been for you inside.
You're my sister, and I'm worried about you.
Hey, Eva. Congratulations.
Don't let him get to you.
I don't.
I need to know what you want from all of this.
I went back in today.
You just got out of prison.
I brought you all in, and now?
Now things are different.
Set in Alberta, In Cold Light stars Micah Monroe as Ava, an ex-con attempting to get her life back together after being released from 2 years in prison on drug charges. Her brother, Tom, played by Jesse Irving, embraces Ava's return with open arms. But Ava's gruff rodeo rider father, Will, played by Oscar winner Troy Kotsur, wants nothing to do with her. Although Ava is able to land a menial job at the local bull ring, what she really wants is back into the criminal game. Her former partners offer her a $40,000 buyout to stay away, which she doesn't take. She should have reconsidered. Soon she's framed for the murder of her brother by a crooked cop, played by Alan Hocko, who's under the employ of a major drug kingpin who's hiding out near the oil sands, played by an underused and oddly cast Helen Hunt. In Cold Light is the latest film from Quebecois filmmaker Maxime Giroux, director of Felix and Maria and The Great Darkened Days. A standard thriller seems well outside of Giroux's more artful wheelhouse, but he's able to make In Cold Light into a visually dynamic, compulsively watchable bit of business. The script from Patrick Whistler is a standard crime melodrama, but Giroux brings it to vibrant life at every turn. Giroux is adept at building tension and keeping the pace moving as quickly as possible. There's a colorful sort of grittiness that inhabits every frame, including some creative usage of lighting in scenes set in a bleached-out-looking supermarket, or in one memorable sequence when Monroe and Kotsur are arguing in a backyard with a motion detector light that keeps turning on and off. Giroux also isn't afraid to get a bit weird, surreal, and dreamlike to keep things interesting, but your tolerance for that kind of spice in what's mostly a point A to point B thriller could vary. Monroe is just the right blend of tough and vulnerable in the lead, Hako gets a chance to get dark and dirty for a change, and Coates delivers another stellar performance as a perpetually grieving father who's suffered way more losses than he can bear. The best thing that can be said about In Cold Light is that it's highly entertaining and gorgeous to look at. It's an old dog that's learned some neat new tricks. I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10.
So tell us about your film.
So it's a personal story about my parents. It starts in Adelaide in 1977. They build a home together and they coach each other through life to make a good family. But he's considered too political, too controversial, and so he says he needs to leave. He needs to find opportunities in a more progressive part of the world.
You weren't hurt or angry at your father leaving?
Sophie Hyde's maudlin, overcooked family drama Jimpa is the kind of backfire that comes born of the best intentions. Jimpa means well, but it also doesn't know what it means. Instead of a film about fostering connections, understandings, and acceptance between generations of a fractured family, the film goes all over the place with its messaging by taking on too much character baggage for any one film to adequately handle. Non-binary teenager Frances, played by the director's kid Aude Mason Hyde, is traveling with their filmmaker and intimacy coordinator mother Hannah, played by Olivia Colman, to Amsterdam to spend some time with her gay activist father Jim, played by John Lithgow. Frances tells their parents that they would like to spend a year hanging out with Jim. Mom and Dad frown upon this idea, knowing that Jim is an imperfect idol for their kid, but Frances insists that they want to spend some time getting to know a larger queer community outside of the one that they have back home in Australia. Jim is a charismatic, passionate guy who tirelessly advocated for gay people at the height of the HIV and AIDS crisis, but he's also a decidedly old-school person in his thinking. He believes that people need to define themselves in hard and fast terms and that, quote-unquote, there's no such thing as a bisexual. He thinks that people who don't conform into boxes of sexual preference are cowards, which naturally builds tension with Frances, who wants to explore non-monogamous and polyamorous relationships. He abhors the term queer, as he says he spent decades of his life fighting against the use of the word. He also goes as far as to call Frances, quote-unquote, my grand thing. He does all of this with charisma and somewhat in jest, but Frances and Hannah, who knows better after having grown up around him, aren't impressed. And it would be all well and good if that's the only ground that Jimpa, a mashup of the words Jim and Grandpa, was trying to cover. But Hyde, best known for the film Good Luck to You, Leo Grand, can't stick to a single unifying thread. A film about an impressionable teen learning that the family member they idolized is a flawed, problematic, and complicated person is a great thread for a drama. Unfortunately, Jimpa gets dragged down by trying to fix a whole bunch of additional problems that need solving and addressing. Mason Hyde performs the best here, mostly because they have the most linear and engaging arc. Whenever Sophie Hyde focuses on Frances trying to figure out the next steps in their life, Jimpa is on solid ground. But everything involving Coleman's wishy-washy mother threatens to overtake the film, and sadly this is what seems most personal to Hyde as a filmmaker. Hannah's trying to make a film about the relationship her father and mother had, and wants it to be about how there wasn't any conflict in the amicable dissolution of their marriage. But lo and behold, it turns out that Hannah has spent her entire life trying to avoid conflict of any kind, something that in part leads to her cheating on her stick-in-the-mud husband with Jim's close personal assistant and confidant, Richard, played by Eamon Farron. There's also a bit about an activist lodger who's spent a long time living with Jim, which goes absolutely nowhere. There's a lot about Jim's attempts to land a final job in his declining health, and there's a romantic interest for Frances, which seems like it should be a bigger deal, but it gets lost in the shuffle. And on top of all of this plot and character, Jimpa also carves out a lot of space for large group sequences where old and young members of the LGBTQ2S+ community talk about their lives and past struggles, stopping the film at various points to deliver history lessons. All of this is very well-meaning, but it's all too much. The result is a film that's desperately trying to overwhelm the viewer into feeling a lot of different things at once, when it would be much better suited to focusing on the obvious singular thread that gives Hyde's film the greatest meaning. Hannah's problems feel like distractingly small potatoes in comparison to what Frances is going through, and instead of speaking to the modern and historical queer and non-binary experience, Jimpa is constantly getting bogged down in semantic arguments that are designed to provoke instead of carrying on an interesting or focused conversation around them. Perhaps as a side effect of having too much material and too much on its mind to work with, the editorial instincts of Jimpa are sometimes jittery and jumpy, and there are a few too many mainstream courting moments where there are montages and singing and dancing that feel more like buying a rainbow flag from a department store than genuine, nuanced shows of allyship. A lot of this has been done with good intentions, and the subject matter is clearly personal to the Hydes, but Jimpa is a project that could have used a lot more pruning and shaping before going in front of a camera. This one gets a 5 out of 10. Lee Sang-il's Kokuho has already made waves by becoming the highest-grossing live-action film in Japanese history, and it's easy to see the appeal as it continues its rollout across North America and other territories. While it missed out on being one of the final nominees for this year's Best International Feature Oscar, as did President's Cake from earlier in the video, Kokuho did manage to pick up an underdog nomination in the hair and makeup category. While that recognition is very much warranted, Kokuho is a stunning, massive work that's worth a closer look. Based on a best-selling novel by Shuichi Yoshida and set against the world of traditional Japanese kabuki theater, Kokuho unfolds across a large time span from 1964 to 2014. As a young man, budding kabuki actor Kikuo Tachibana, played by Ryu Yoshizawa, watched in horror as his Yakuza boss father and extended family were slaughtered during a New Year's Eve party. After his plans for vengeance fall short, Kikuo is taken in by a renowned kabuki actor named Hajiro Hanai, played by Ken Watanabe. After having seen potential in the boy, Hanai wants to train Kikuo alongside his own son and heir apparent Shunsuke, played by Ryuichi Yokohama. Although there's some light tension at first, Kikuo and Shunsuke quickly become heartthrobs in a successful tandem act. But once it becomes clear that Hanai prefers his new apprentice to his own son, a wedge is driven between the two boys that will result in a series of successful highs and career-crushing lows for the both of them. Kikuo and Shunsuke are adept at the time-honored tradition of onagata, or the art of men playing women on stage, and even if one doesn't understand the tone and tenor of kabuki itself, the world of Kokuho is entrancing and all-consuming. This is the kind of epic drama that's been missing from cinemas around the world since the 1980s. Lengthy at nearly 3 hours long, but so captivating in terms of detail, character depth, and style that it flies by like a dream one never wants to end. Sang-il treats every character, development, and bit of tradition with respect and delicate touch, all without feeling like a boring history lesson or a monotonous lyrical poem to forgotten traditions. While Kikuo has left the Yakuza world behind him, from the perspective of the backstage politics involved, kabuki theater doesn't seem all that different. Grudges are long-standing. Payback is swift. Family names and connections often hold more weight than talent. The same people who build you up have the power to ruin your life, and the consequences for one's actions off-stage can resonate for years. And some things are just a matter of fate and timing that no one could ever control. It's a minefield for both Kikuo and Shunsuke to navigate, and each gets their turn to handle things both positively and poorly. Neither is portrayed as being better than the other, even though society and circumstance are forcing everyone around them to choose. The inner turmoil experienced by both men across their lives and careers is skillfully examined in the film's thoughtful script and given time to take root by Sang-il's skillful pacing. Some of the earlier threads surrounding Kikuo's past could be better explained and implemented, but given the strength of everything else in the story, that's a minor complaint. The craft on display throughout Kokuho, which translates to National Treasure, is impeccable. The period details are spot on, and the stage design for the performance sequences pays homage to how the art of kabuki has changed over the past 50 years. Sang-il's directorial instincts are strong, offering up unique angles and perspectives on scenes that might have descended into melodrama if they'd been traditionally captured with normal setups. The leading performances from Yokohama and Yoshizawa are powerful, and Watanabe does some of his career best work as the tough-love father figure in both men's lives. This is a film made to be experienced on the largest screen possible, and if you're lucky enough to be in an area where Kokuho might still be playing in a premium format, take full advantage of it. It made my list of the best films of last year for a great reason, and it's held up even better on a recent rewatch. Final score for this is a 9 out of 10.
1, 2, 3, The Beatles have been my whole life, really. When we split up, I thought, I'll never write another note of music ever.
Documentarian Morgan Neville looks at Paul McCartney's life after the Beatles in Man on the Run, a pretty basic riff on a familiar theme that's still well done, candid, and insightful. In 1969, at the age of 27, Paul McCartney didn't know what he was going to do. John Lennon had just quiet quit the Beatles, but no one could say that the band had broken up. So Paul disappeared to his farm off the coast of Scotland with his wife Linda and their kids, only to have everyone start making up rumors that he was dead. At a strange place in life, McCartney was without direction and purpose, caught up in legal battles with former bandmates and being depicted as the reason why the Beatles broke up, which, McCartney admits, has some truth to it. In earnest, he started recording music in his barn. First, a pair of solo records that didn't set the world on fire commercially and fared even worse critically. Then after that came the formation of the band Wings, which would see much more success, albeit with just as much upheaval, criticism, and numerous lineup changes. McCartney will never beat the allegations of being a silly little guy who sometimes values the sappy side of songwriting a bit too much, but Man on the Run depicts a musician as having a keen degree of self-awareness today. He knows his comfort zone and what he's good at, and in discovering that, outside of playing a part in the biggest band in history, he found peace and fulfillment. He's weathered criticism about not being harder in a harsh world, taken flack for always including his wife Linda in his bands, and for being the lesser of the Lennon-McCartney duo. But during the 1970s period depicted in Man on the Run, he learned to start caring less about those things and focusing on the thing that brought him the most joy, making music. The best biopics, especially ones about musicians, often focus on specific time periods in a person's life rather than trying to distill someone's entire career into just 2 hours. Man on the Run is no exception to that. Even if viewers aren't fans of Wings or McCartney's 70s output, it's an easy watch, with the man himself giving a lot of insight and hindsight into where his head and heart were at during this period. He waxes lovingly about what it was like to get back to basics with Wings and his other solo endeavors, and reflectively about the things he could have done better as a songwriter, band member, friend, father, and partner. With films like 20 Feet from Stardom, Roadrunner, a film about Anthony Bourdain, and Won't You Be My Neighbor under his belt, Morgan Neville is pretty much the Ken Burns of this specific kind of biographical documentary. McCartney is in good hands with a filmmaker who doesn't push their subjects too hard, and is also willing to be somewhat critical. Neville plumbs the depths of various archives, including some deeply personal stuff from the McCartney family, and plays sound bites from a variety of interview subjects past and present over the images. You know the kind of documentary this is going to be the moment you start it, but if you press play on it in the first place, you likely aren't going to mind as long as the subject matter is engaging. And it is. Man on the Run gets a 7 out of 10. When last we left the Scream franchise, things were a bit of a mess. After a rejuvenating 5th entry that served as a soft reboot legacy sequel, the 6th entry got off to a rocky start when Neve Campbell, who's played the role of protagonist Sidney Prescott since the first movie back in 1996, declined to return after being offered a lowball salary to return for another one. It didn't hurt that film too much at the box office, so plans were made in earnest to keep forging ahead with the new leading tandem of Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega. Freaky and Happy Death Day writer Christopher Landon was brought on to handle directorial duties, and things seemed like they were off to the races. But when Barrera went to social media to speak out about her support for Palestine, she was promptly let go from the project. Then Ortega left the project in solidarity, although at first it was spun as some sort of scheduling issue the rising star had with the production of the hit series Wednesday. Landon was caught in the middle, having not made the decision to let Barrera go in the first place, but he opened himself up to scrutiny throughout the process. By his account, threats were made against him, and by this point, the film he had signed up to make wasn't going to be anything like the thing he envisioned, and he left too. The studio, Paramount, and the production company, Spyglass Media, then turned to original series writer Kevin Williamson to come in as a screenwriter and director to partake in a costly rewrite process, one that would bring Campbell back into the fold, albeit at a much higher salary to make up for how she was slated on the previous entry. If you knew all of this already and had to sit through all of it again, I'm sorry. But in this case, to adequately describe the messy, shambolic state that Scream 7 brings to the local multiplex, context is somewhat necessary. And if you care at all about a review for Scream 7, there's a good chance you're a fan of the franchise and are looking for something to talk or argue about. So in the interest of letting you know where I'm coming from on this, here are the things you need to know. First off, I'm not going to spoil anything about the reveals or cameos or anything like that. Even if I don't like something, I'm going to respect a person's ability to retain some degree of excitement or discovery. Second, my feelings on the other movies are as follows. First film's a masterpiece. Second film is one of the best sequels of all time. Third film is a mess, but there's some good stuff in there. Fourth is underrated. Fifth is pretty damn good. Sixth was a letdown, but not because Campbell wasn't there. And finally, if there are quote-unquote sides in a fight, I fully support Barrera's political stance and ability to stand up for her convictions, and that Campbell can demand whatever she wants as a payday because the franchise needs her more than she needs it. Neither of those last two things have any bearing on why Scream 7 ultimately sucks and takes the mantle of being the worst and laziest film in the franchise. This one is set a year after the previous film, which is constantly given shade in this one as being brutal and not the same without Sidney being there. And while I didn't love the sixth film, trying to put that one down in the context of this mess is an alarming cell-phone. Scream 7 picks up with Campbell Sidney living a quiet, peaceful life outside the public eye, running a coffee shop in the small town of Pine Grove with their teenage daughter Tatum, played by Isabel May, and chief of police husband, played by Joel McHale. Like many teens, Tatum wants to spread her wings a bit more, but her mom, who hates talking about her past for, reasons, is naturally protective. As in the past, Sidney starts to get spooky phone calls saying she's gonna die, her friends are gonna die, her family's gonna die, and that she's gonna pay for what she's done in the past. In this case, as with the other times, the killer or killers is trying to make things very personal, calling upon past precedents to justify their upcoming and ongoing killing sprees. After an uninspired but well-choreographed cold open that self-owns its own premise by suggesting you can seemingly profit off of anything these days, Scream 7 settles in for a thinly plotted trip down nostalgia lane that only offers the most basic of gory delights and nothing that can hold a candle to the suspense and intrigue generated by the entries that came before it. The problem with making a franchise that's self-aware and audience-savvy is that after a while the very concept will back itself into a corner unless something new is being done. The Scream films took such painstaking steps to ensure that the viewer paid attention to the rules, cliches, and tropes of horror movies that it wanted people to pay close attention to what they were watching, piecing things together alongside the heroes that are trying to reveal the culprit in classic Scooby-Doo fashion. The problem here, however, is that there aren't any new tricks to be had outside of an infuriating and ludicrous thread revolving around the way technology has changed and how the viewer can't believe what they see. It's a bit that Williamson clearly thinks is very smart, and while his stance isn't exactly wrong from an ethical standpoint, the very concept opens up gaping plot holes that defied all sense of logic. It requires people to do things on the fly faster than humanly or mechanically possible. It's not a spoiler to say that the big killer reveal isn't that the murderer is a robot, but honestly, that would have been the only reveal that would have made a lick of sense. And all I'll say about the killer reveal here is that it is the absolute weakest of any film in the series, by a very wide margin. But getting back to what I was saying about how the Scream movies before this point valued people paying close attention, this is a movie that desperately hopes you are not that viewer. It wants to court the segment of the franchise's fans who only want the thrill ride and jump scares. It absolutely does not want you thinking about what you see, because the second you try to bring logic into it, the whole thing crumbles like a candy house in the rain. To Williamson's credit as a director, he has learned one major lesson from Wes Craven's work on the first 4 films. He knew precisely where to draw the viewer's eye in the frame and understands the art of visual misdirection. The jump scares are predictable for those who know the territory, but some of them work out of sheer force of will. Jumpy people will be jumping in Scream 7, and I'm sure for some segment of the audience that'll be enough. I also have to give a special and brief shout out to composer Marco Beltrami, who's back after sitting out the last 2 films, who at one point offers up one of the catchiest, swinginest chase music themes I've heard in quite some time. Honestly, one of the best musical moments in the series. Next to the fact that Ghostface is kinda glittery in some scenes, is the best campy bit of razzle-dazzle on display here. But without a credible leg to stand on as a mystery or suspense thriller, Scream 7 plays like an unintentional work of self-parody. The other films in the franchise always had a lot of humor, but Scream 7 was the first movie where I wasn't sure if I was laughing with the movie or laughing at it. There were a lot of things that made me chuckle that I'm positive I wasn't supposed to laugh at. The insane amounts of lugubrious retconning Scream 7 has to do in order to make sense unfolds in lengthy, laughable scenes where characters have to explain themselves with the hammiest and least organic of dialogue, events that we could never see, and developments that come out of nowhere to put characters into the places they need to be. There is a precise moment where I knew Scream 7 had lost me and the movie was landing with a loud thud, and I can remember it because it's accented by an actual loud thud. If you see the movie, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's a moment that I'm sure seemed like a slam dunk in Williamson's head, but on screen it comes across as just a lazy way to keep things moving along. At this point, it becomes clear that Scream 7's particular brand of humor has become the thing series detractors have been saying for a long time. It's smug. This is a smug, self-important movie, made worse by the fact that the lazy nostalgia trip it offers up is being delivered by a bunch of people who seem like they don't want to be there. Whenever it comes time for bloodletting, Williamson's set pieces show some creativity in their dynamics, but it constantly lapses into slapstick territory, something the previous entries never really did. In all the other Scream films, deaths meant something, even if they were deaths by misadventure or an awful person meeting a suitably brutal demise. Here, every death feels like a punchline waiting to be acknowledged. The violence is goofy in ways the other films weren't, and something feels off about it. And while Williamson can frame a shot, everything else about the construction of Scream 7 feels like a work-for-hire gig. Anyone could have made this, and it would turn out just the same. Then there's Campbell, who I have mixed feelings about here. I'm deeply unsure how much of her character's wariness is by design, and how much is Campbell being mentally checked out. Scenes where she's opposite McHale's husband character show zero chemistry and enthusiasm whatsoever. Only about half the time does it feel like May and Campbell could ever be related, and it's up to the much better and more dynamic May to do all the heavy lifting, and even then the younger actress, and the rest of the young cast for that matter, are being wasted in service of the nostalgia trip. Campbell's best scene comes relatively late in the film and opposite fellow I'm here because they cut the check trooper Courtney Cox. It's a scene where Cox is actually able to draw some energy and drama from Campbell at just the right time, and that energy does extend through to the end of the movie. That ending is bad, mind you, but at least Campbell acts more invested in what's happening instead of going through the motions. Maybe because even she knows this movie is almost over. Scream started out by speaking to horror and mystery buffs on terms they could understand. It referenced other movies with hopes that the smart viewer could use that knowledge to go on a journey with the characters on screen. Scream 7 is a film where that is long gone. It's a franchise that can now only reference itself in all of the things it has trotted out already over the course of 7 films. It knows what you're thinking all the time, but it also has no way to subvert those expectations because the goal of a nostalgia trip is to just offer up the same darn thing that's worked 6 times before. It doesn't want the viewer to feel like they're party to a grand reveal. It wants them to feel absolutely stupid about what they just sat through. You can only shout, "Everyone's a suspect!" so many times and hide behind that as a premise. We know, dude. We've been on this rodeo 6 times before. We know how this works. And to pair that with not much more than a bunch of fan service and callbacks is the low road here. Scream 7 is all empty calories and not really the fun kind. This one gets an exhausting 4 out of 10, and that's only because there are a couple of set pieces and performances in the supporting cast that are trying to imbue this with some fun. There's one cast member who seems to clock just how much of a joke this thing is, and they're a blast to watch even under the most ridiculous of circumstances. And that's something I don't want to spoil. It's not worth seeing if you aren't into this sort of thing, but if you need a reason, that's really the only one I can give you. And that's it for this week. Will next week bring just as much worth talking about? Who knows, but tune in to find out. Leave a comment letting me know what you think about any of the films I covered this week. As always, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.